What if I told you that everything you believed in is a lie? You probably picture cozy castles, minstrels, and elegant royal feasts. Movies show us lords enjoying roasted meat with a goblet of wine in hand. The food seems to appear out of nowhere, as if by the magic of invisible, helpful fairies. But the reality behind the creation of this splendor was terrifyingly brutal and filthy. I invite you to descend into the most dangerous room in any medieval castle. The medieval kitchen had nothing in common with the clean culinary arts of today. It was a veritable industrial workshop, operating at the limits of human physical endurance. Workers were constantly subjected to conditions that today would be called a gross violation of safety regulations. Your modern office job may seem stressful because of burning paper deadlines, but here, deadlines literally burned with a bright, searing flame. Let's take this hellish machine apart, piece by piece, and see how it worked.
Take this slice to the high table, quickly now.
Yes, my lord.
The scale of food production in a medieval castle boggles any modern imagination and forces us to take a fresh look at the history of daily life. An ordinary lord or noble baron had to provide daily sustenance for hundreds of garrison soldiers, numerous servants, and capricious distinguished guests. This is nothing like the elegant candlelit dinner for two in a quiet, expensive restaurant that we are accustomed to today. It was a full-scale, highly complex logistical operation to save the entire fortress from an inevitable hunger riot or collapse of strength. To prepare such unimaginably vast quantities of food, the kitchens required roaring fires the size of a small wooden hut. The fire had to burn practically around the clock, maintaining the necessary temperature for huge carcasses and heavy cauldrons. Sounds crazy and extremely dangerous, doesn't it? Yet this is exactly how the heart of any castle functioned, consuming tons of firewood and producing megawatts of thermal energy. The main threat in this cramped and noisy kitchen was the ever-present, treacherous, and utterly merciless open fire. The fireplaces in such rooms were built so enormous that a full-grown man could easily stand upright inside the hearth. Imagine a modern open hearth furnace into which you must regularly and fearlessly stick your bare hands. Every awkward movement risked resulting in a severe injury, which in those days was virtually untreatable. Cooks and their numerous assistants worked in close proximity to open flames for 14 hours straight every day. Modern firefighters donned special fire-resistant protective suits and helmets when entering areas with such extreme temperatures. A medieval cook, however, wore at best only a thick woolen apron and quietly hoped for luck and his own skill. The constant heat dried out the skin and mucous membranes, turning the work into an endless survival session at the epicenter of a volcano. But why didn't they simply use safer, enclosed stone ovens, the kind we're familiar with today? The answer is simple, because even the largest enclosed oven of that time couldn't produce the necessary volume of roasted meat for an entire army. An open fire provided a unique opportunity to cook entire carcasses of wild boars or deer on heavy iron spits. It was the only way to feed 300 or 400 hungry and armed men at once. This cooking method required constant visual supervision and the cook's physical presence right at the source of the scorching heat. A single misstep on the floor, slippery with spilled fat and sweat, could instantly prove fatal for a worker. And believe me, there was far more grease on those uneven stone floors than in a modern, busy car wash. The slippery surface, combined with the proximity to the fire, made the kitchen the most injury-prone place in the entire feudal estate. Ventilation in these huge rooms with high-vaulted ceilings was a separate kind of engineering and construction nightmare. Chimneys were built incredibly wide to carry away excess heat, but the harsh laws of physics often worked against the unfortunate cooks. Huge quantities of damp or poorly dried firewood emitted toxic carbon monoxide and thick, highly acrid smoke. The smoke filled the space from floor to ceiling, stinging the eyes and making it difficult to navigate the room. People were literally suffocating at their workstations, blindly trying to make out a simple carrot or a piece of bread on the cutting board. Modern, powerful electric range hoods easily handle even the heavy steam from a large home cooking pot. In a medieval castle, however, the air was thick, gray, and poisonous, like the industrial London smog of the worst years of the Industrial Revolution. Every morning began with servants trying to dispel the stagnant smoke, but the fire quickly brought the smokescreen back. Due to the constant and forced inhalation of combustion products, kitchen workers rapidly developed severe chronic lung diseases. Modern historical studies of the skeletons of kitchen servants often reveal pathological changes in the bones, characteristic of deep-mine miners. Their bodies wore down at an alarming rate, resisting constant poisoning and oxygen deprivation. They coughed as often and as violently as people who had worked for decades in dusty, dark coal mines. My lungs began to ache desperately and genuinely at the very thought of that smoky trap. It was the price the lower classes paid so that the Lord could enjoy the aroma of a fresh roast. In such dreadful and unsanitary conditions, even simple hot water became a source of serious, daily danger to life. Boiling multi-liter cauldrons of soups and stews hung directly over the fire on heavy forged iron chains. If even a single link in the old steam-rusted chains suddenly gave way, dozens of liters of scalding water would pour down on people. This led to widespread burns and injuries, which often resulted in blood poisoning. As you well understand, specialized burn treatment centers simply did not exist in the 13th century. All treatment usually consisted of applying strange folk ointments made of goose fat and herbs, along with long, heartfelt prayers. Today, any occupational safety inspector would shut down such an establishment in exactly 3 seconds and issue a massive fine. But for a medieval person, this was harsh everyday reality, in which risk was considered an integral part of life. Lighting added yet another serious layer of risk to this endless and exhausting culinary quest. During the day, faint natural light filtered through narrow defensive loopholes, of which there were critically few in the thick walls. In the evening, however, the cooks had to rely on dim, smoky tallow candles and the uneven light from the blazing hearths. Shadows danced across the walls, distorting distances and making it difficult to concentrate on delicate work. Working with heavy, massive, and incredibly sharp knives in such dim light was a surefire way to quickly lose your fingers. And yet, despite the darkness, they managed to expertly butcher the livestock and very quickly chop vegetables for the side dishes. It was practically working blind, where muscle memory honed over years completely replaced a person's vision. Professionalism was born of pain and hundreds of small cuts, which over time turned into rough scars on their hands. This entire complex and dangerous system was held together solely by a strict hierarchy and ironclad, almost military discipline. The castle's head chef was not merely a talented cook, but a stern and resolute commander of his fiery legion. His authority was unquestionable, for the success of the entire meal and the safety of the staff depended on the precision of his commands. He issued orders with the same lightning speed as an experienced general on the field of a decisive battle. The slightest mistake in the proportions of expensive spices or the cooking time could cost the Lord his reputation, and the chef himself, his own head. It was a real daily battle for survival, taking place in the castle at least 3 times a day. The cooks knew that behind them stood hundreds of hungry people whose patience could run out along with the last serving of meat. And now let's take a closer look at who exactly stood on the very front lines of this endless culinary war. The most horrific, exhausting, and thankless job in the entire castle kitchen was that of the ordinary boy tasked with turning the spit. It sounds like a pretty boring but generally easy summer job for a modern, active school kid, right? In reality, it was a true psyche-shattering ordeal of physical endurance and heat stroke. Young children and teenagers were forced to sit right next to the roaring fire for long hours without a single break to rest. They had to continuously turn a heavy iron handle at a steady pace so that the Lord's precious meat wouldn't burn. Modern fitness trainers would call this extreme isometric exercise, inevitably leading to complete muscle failure. The child's body went numb, his muscles felt like lead, but his hand was not allowed to stop for even a second. The slightest slowdown was punished with a shout or a blow from the cook, who closely monitored the roasting process. Why couldn't they just let the large piece of meat cook on one side until done? Because a whole carcass weighing 50 or even 80 kilograms requires perfectly even heat distribution. If the slow rotation were to stop for even a single minute, one side would instantly turn into inedible charcoal. Meanwhile, the other side would remain completely raw, cold, and potentially deadly to an aristocrat's delicate stomach. This is basic physical thermodynamics, which people of that era understood through their own bitter, painful, and long-standing practical experience. Your modern home microwave spins a glass plate inside for the exact same logical and technical reason. The only difference is that, in the castle, the role of the automatic motor was played by living children, tormented by the heat. Without this rotation, it would have been impossible to roast the meat all the way to the bone without turning the outer layer to ash. The heat from the gigantic hearth was so intense and aggressive that the boys had to constantly find ways to protect themselves. They tried to cover their faces with special homemade wooden shields or wet, dirty rags to avoid burning their eyes. But wet fabric dried out incredibly quickly under such conditions, becoming stiff and starting to smolder right on their delicate skin. Often the children worked practically naked because any coarse clothing would instantly become soaked with acrid sweat and hinder their movement. Severe dehydration set in rapidly, and sudden fainting spells from hunger and heat were an absolutely common occurrence in the kitchen. It was, in essence, an ancient and very cruel Finnish sauna, except that one was strictly forbidden to leave until the very end of the feast. Constant exposure to high temperatures ruined the children's health before they even had a chance to grow up. Heat stress became their constant companion, numbing their senses and turning life into an endless nightmare by the fire. Now imagine for a moment the colossal total weight they had to rotate with their bare, exhausted hands. A single long wrought iron spit could hold an entire wild boar and several large birds at once to save space. This amounted to over 100 kilograms of dead, slippery, and extremely awkward weight that fiercely resisted every new turn. The boys had to lean their entire bodies against the handle to overcome the resistance of the metal and the force of gravity. The metal, unlubricated mechanisms screeched loudly throughout the kitchen, seized up from carbon buildup, and demanded enormous daily physical effort. Today, professional weightlifters lift such impressive weights in comfortable, clean gyms with powerful air conditioning. These guys did it in a veritable hell, amid smoke and soot, and without any breaks for a protein bar or a shower. Every turn of the handle was a small victory of will over an exhausted and weakened body. Modern sports medicine knows for certain that severe heat stroke rapidly destroys vital proteins in the human body. When body temperature rises above the critical 40 degrees, internal organs begin to fail en masse and irreversibly.
Keep turning that spit.
Roman legionnaires in their time also trained hard in the heat, but they always had clean water and life-saving vinegar. Medieval kitchen servants, however, very often didn't even have a sip of plain water on hand during their shifts. They often drank cheap, weak beer to quench their thirst. But alcohol only accelerated the deadly process of dehydration in their bodies. The science of proper hydration and electrolytes came to humanity too late for these millions of unfortunate souls. They literally burned out at work, leaving their strength by the scorching stones of the hearth. Many of them did not live to reach adulthood, dying of heart failure or infections caused by constant overheating. To keep from going completely mad from the maddening monotony, the boys came up with strange and simple diversions. Sometimes they sang loud, rhythmic songs in unison to maintain the steady, required speed of the heavy spit. This is very similar to how the hardened rowers on war galleys used a steady drumbeat to stay in sync. The rhythm helped them stay on track, feel their comrades' shoulders, and put their exhausted brains into a state of light trance. This set rhythm helped conserve their last precious reserves of strength and provided at least a little distraction from the unbearable pain in their muscles and joints. It is astonishing how effectively and quickly the human psyche adapts even to the utterly unbearable conditions of slave labor. They turned their brutal daily torture into their own strange musical ritual of survival amidst the fire. Song became the only way to preserve the remnants of human dignity in conditions where you were valued less than firewood. But sometimes human strength, and even more so a child's, was simply not enough to carry out this hellish and arduous task. And this is where the story becomes truly interesting, unusual, and even a bit historically absurd for our times. In Old England, a special breed of dogs was bred specifically for this purpose, and they were called wheel dogs. These were long, stocky, and very muscular animals with short legs, outwardly very similar to modern corgis. They were placed inside a special wooden wheel, which was cleverly attached to the spit via a complex system of leather straps and pulleys. The dog obediently ran inside this wheel like a fluffy pet hamster, and the meat rotated evenly over the hot fire. The animals worked in shifts, taking turns when one dog's strength was running out. This was the first attempt at automating kitchen processes, where animal power replaced a mechanical engine. The use of trained dogs seems today like a brilliant, albeit cruel, engineering solution to the problem of a shortage of cheap labor. They ran in these hamster wheels for long hours, spurred on by loud shouts from people or even by hot coals placed beneath them. It sounds incredibly cruel, and today any animal rights activists would have caused a massive international scandal and lawsuits over this. But in those harsh times, any dog was considered simply another useful and functional kitchen tool. The engineering of the grim and practical Middle Ages always found a way out of any difficult situation through the most extravagant and cheapest means. Your modern smart home essentially does the same thing, simply using clean electricity instead of poor, starving corgis. Spinning dogs became a symbol of an era when every life was subordinated to a single goal: setting a lavish table for the master. When the breed became obsolete with the advent of steam engines, it simply vanished, leaving only mentions in old cookbooks. When dogs were not available for whatever reason, all the hard work fell once again on the shoulders of young people and children. Many boys suffered irreversible and very painful joint damage due to this monotonous physical labor. Their shoulder ligaments were completely worn out by the age of 20 from constant and repetitive rotational movements. Sports traumatologists today call this condition pitcher's syndrome, which is very common among professional baseball players. But these medieval lads didn't receive multi-million-dollar contracts, fame, or quality health insurance for their disabling injuries. They received only a bowl of thin, insubstantial soup and the right to sleep in a warm but stuffy and smoky corner of the kitchen. By the age of 30, such men often became frail old men, incapable of any other work. The castle kitchen took their youth and health, returning only scars and chronic shortness of breath. This position was the absolute and hopeless bottom of the entire kitchen hierarchy, the true social dregs of any castle. But without these unnoticed heroes, covered in soot and grime, the entire lavish royal feast would have been technically impossible. It was their bitter, salty sweat and hands rubbed raw with blood that ensured that very perfect golden crust on the count's venison. Without their monotonous labor, the feast would have turned into a pile of coals and raw meat that would have been impossible to eat. This is the main cruel irony of the entire medieval class and social system of that time. The luxury, splendor, and comfort of some people were always and invariably built on the invisible, bone-breaking, and soul-crushing labor of others. But meat cooked to perfection over the fire was only part of the castle's enormous supply problem, for the rest of the ingredients still had to be prepared. The kitchen was merely the beginning of a long chain of suffering that sustained the grandeur of the feudal world.
Freshly baked bread, get your loaves here. Finest wool in the county.
We have grown accustomed to trusting the ideal, almost surgical cleanliness of modern commercial kitchens completely and unconditionally, thanks to strict government sanitation standards. Restaurants everywhere use smooth stainless steel, strong disinfectants, and thin latex gloves to handle any raw ingredients. In a 13th century castle, the very scientific concept of bacteria or microbes was completely unknown to people. No one even suspected the existence of tiny organisms capable of causing severe poisoning or even the death of an entire family. People of that time sincerely believed that all dangerous diseases were transmitted exclusively through bad, stagnant air, so-called poisonous miasmas. Therefore, washing one's hands with soap before butchering a huge carcass was considered a pointless, foolish, and utterly senseless waste of precious time. You would hardly want to peek behind the scenes of the preparation of your lavish Friday dinner if you had a time machine. The scene you would see there would forever rob you of your appetite and your faith in noble medieval cuisine. The main work surfaces in the kitchen were made of very thick, heavy, and extremely porous wood. Butchers mercilessly chopped fresh meat, wildfowl, and river fish on the same logs for decades, passing them down from generation to generation. Blood and aggressive animal juices seeped incredibly deep into the wood structure, creating a simply ideal environment for bacterial growth. The wood was literally saturated with rot from the inside, becoming a source of constant stench that cooks eventually simply stopped noticing. A modern health inspector would undoubtedly have fainted on the spot just from taking a routine swab from the surface of such a work table. Servants would sometimes wipe down the tables with ordinary dirty rags, but these rags were themselves veritable biological weapons of delayed action. It is surprising and almost unbelievable that the pampered aristocracy survived at all after such lavish and abundant banquets, featuring dozens of courses. They were saved only by the fact that the immune systems of people in those days were hardened by constant exposure to dirt and infections. Preserving perishable foods for long periods without electric refrigerators was a true art form and a daily gamble. Meat was generously salted, smoked, or covered with a thick, impermeable layer of fat to completely block oxygen from reaching the fibers. This worked and allowed food to be stored for months, but the final taste of the dish often left much to be desired due to the onset of hidden decay. The food had a distinct odor that could not be completely eliminated by simple heat treatment in a cauldron or on a spit. To reliably mask the smell of slightly spoiled or stale meat, cooks used aggressive combinations of very expensive imported spices. Cloves, black pepper, and nutmeg were not just aromatic seasonings in those days, but a powerful and necessary culinary camouflage. It's very much like using strong perfume instead of simply taking a normal, hot morning shower. The spices overwhelmed the guests' senses, making them believe they were eating the freshest produce, not meat that was past its prime. Ordinary water in the castle kitchen was another source of constant, hidden, and completely invisible danger. Clean spring drinking water was extremely rare, so the most common river or well water was often used for daily cooking. And as we know all too well from history, medieval rivers were indiscriminately dumped with all manner of waste from a large city. The water was teeming with pathogens causing cholera, typhus, and other dreadful diseases that could wipe out half the population in a matter of weeks. Long boiling in soups and broths helped somewhat, successfully killing most of the deadly intestinal infections known today. But dishes and cups were washed with this very dirty water, leaving microscopic and highly effective serial killers on their surfaces. It was an endless, vicious cycle of intestinal disorders and infections, which people simply humbly attributed to the will of harsh and punishing gods. Constant diarrhea was so commonplace that it wasn't even mentioned in chronicles as anything significant. Hungry rats and brazen mice felt just as at home in the vast medieval kitchen as they did in their own homes. They brazenly lived in the grain storehouses, ran along the ceiling rafters, and easily gnawed through sacks of precious sifted white flour. It was practically impossible to effectively combat them, despite the presence of hundreds of aggressive and perpetually hungry kitchen cats in the castle. The rodents multiplied at an incredible rate, finding food in every corner of this vast gastronomic enterprise. The waste products of these small rodents regularly found their way into the dough being kneaded and the thick, rich meat stews. Today's strict government regulations allow only a tiny, almost negligible percentage of foreign contaminants in the modern food industry. In the harsh Middle Ages, a single rat hair in a loaf of bread was simply a free protein supplement to your fresh daily bread. No one made a fuss if they found traces of mice on their plate. It was accepted as a necessary evil. To combat the hordes of pests in any way possible, desperate cooks sometimes used substances that were openly poisonous and dangerous to humans. They generously scattered deadly arsenic in all the dark corners, sincerely hoping to kill the rats before they got to the grain supplies. But arsenic is a fine white powder that looks suspiciously similar to ordinary powdered sugar or salt. Storing such substances near food was sheer madness, but people simply had no other choice. It's not hard to imagine that sometimes these powders were accidentally mixed up in the hustle and nervous chaos during an important evening banquet. A mistake involving a single tiny pinch could easily and effortlessly send half the entire royal court to the afterlife. Here is a vivid example of a sudden change in the ruling dynasty due to the trivial kitchen carelessness of a young assistant cook. Death on a plate was just as real a threat as an enemy's arrow or a conspiracy during a hunt in the forest. Butchering huge, heavy carcasses of wild animals carried serious risks of immediate and fatal blood poisoning. Professional cooks constantly had deep cuts, scratches, and scars from old thermal burns on their hands. When you butcher a wild forest boar with an open wound on your palm, dangerous bacteria inevitably enter your bloodstream. Inflammation would set in, which in the absence of antibiotics could turn a healthy man into a corpse in a matter of days.
Such loyalty must be rewarded. We shall discuss the details.
And let's not forget the elite and expensive tableware from which wealthy lords and their distinguished, high-ranking guests ate every day. Rich people preferred incredibly beautiful, shiny goblets and heavy plates made of a soft lead alloy, pewter. Acidic foods, such as ripe tomatoes, fruits, or tart wine, inevitably entered into a slow chemical reaction with this lead. The metal gradually leached out of the tableware and into the food, becoming part of the aristocracy's daily diet. This toxic metal dissolved over the years and slowly but surely accumulated in the delicate and pampered bodies of medieval aristocrats. The accumulation of lead caused progressive insanity, infertility, fits of rage, and a painful death from severe heavy metal poisoning. It turns out they paid huge sums of gold for beautiful plates that were literally killing them day in and day out. The irony of fate was that the poor, who ate from simple wooden bowls, were far safer in this regard than their masters. The kitchen was a veritable madhouse of a chemistry lab, where any daring experiments very often spiraled completely out of control. Cooks constantly walked a fine line between creating a brilliant flavor and posing a deadly biological threat to all diners. Surviving a lavish festive feast without ill effects was as great an achievement as winning a real jousting tournament. The human body of that era had to be incredibly robust to digest everything served on the tables in the banquet halls. This entire vast and complex system relied solely on intuition, strong stomachs, and incredible historical luck. But if you naively think that appalling unsanitary conditions were these people's main problem, you are very much mistaken. There was one thing that terrified kitchen workers far more than any invisible germs or tiny rodents in the flour. It was the very real threat of physical annihilation for which they were prepared at any moment. If you ask what was the most consumed resource in a castle, many would confidently say food. But this is fundamentally incorrect, because the main resource for survival was the ordinary felled tree. To keep the fires in the kitchen hearth burning constantly required truly enormous amounts of firewood. The fire was never allowed to go out completely, neither during the day nor on a deep cold night. A dying hearth always meant a delay in meals, the Lord's wrath, and possible severe corporal punishment. Modern industrial plants consume megawatts of electricity, but the castle greedily devoured entire forests. The daily delivery of firewood to the kitchen was a separate, arduous, and exhausting logistical task. Especially strong servants carried hundreds of kilograms of wood on their worn-out backs every day. They had to struggle up steep, slippery stone steps in any kind of foul weather. The firewood had to be absolutely dry, because wet wood produces little heat and a lot of smoke. And storing dry wood next to a roaring fire is a violation of every conceivable fire safety rule. But there was no other choice, and the wood piles were located dangerously close to the stoves. The vast amount of ash from the burned wood also became a massive problem for the entire castle. It had to be disposed of urgently, and the volumes amounted to many tons every month. But medieval people were incredibly practical and never threw anything away for no reason. The gray kitchen ash was carefully collected in barrels and used to produce caustic lye. This lye was then entirely used for making soap and washing the clothes of all the fortress's inhabitants. It was, in essence, the world's first ideal system of waste-free, eco-friendly production. Now let's talk about things that smell much worse than harmless kitchen ash. The daily butchering of hundreds of animals left mountains of bones, intestines, and inedible, slimy organs. In a modern restaurant, a special sanitation truck arrives and takes away all food waste. In the castle, this biological waste was simply dumped into the moat or a special cesspit. In the summer, the stench of entrails rotting in the sun was so strong that it literally brought tears to your eyes. But on the other hand, it deterred enemies far better than any heavily armed mounted patrol. The deep moat surrounding the castle often turned into a biological cesspool, deadly to life. Waste from the kitchen, toilets, and stables all flowed into it unchecked at the same time. If an enemy soldier fell into such a moat during an assault, he did not die from a well-aimed arrow. He died of instantaneous sepsis, having swallowed this toxic, bubbling green sludge. It was a natural, impassable barrier made of select bacteria and decaying animal flesh. It is amazing how the castle's dirtiest and smelliest problem became its best defense. A small portion of the kitchen waste, however, was given a second, more useful and necessary life. Dry animal bones were fed to dogs or ground into bone meal to fertilize the fields. The pigs living near the castle happily finished off spoiled vegetables and leftover porridge. These pigs would then themselves end up safely on the spit, closing the great natural food cycle. Modern eco-activists could learn a lot from the Middle Ages about effective recycling. They didn't know the trendy word ecology, but they practiced it at the highest level. The dirty fat that dripped from the meat during frying was an incredibly valuable strategic resource. It was carefully and meticulously collected in special metal trays called drip pans. This dirty, smoke-scented fat was used on a massive scale to produce cheap household candles. Such candles smoked heavily, smelled awful, but provided at least some light during the long, cold winters. They were called tallow candles, and it was these that illuminated most of the dark castle. Your modern vanilla-scented candles would have seemed to the Lord like unthinkable witchcraft. Cleaning the massive iron cauldrons of caked-on grease was a separate circle of kitchen hell. Dishwashers of that time used coarse river sand and bundles of rough straw instead of sponges. They scrubbed the iron walls with all their might for hours, scraping the skin off their hands until they bled. The water was ice cold, because wasting firewood to heat water for washing was considered an unallowable luxury. The harsh, soapy lye corroded their wet fingers, leaving deep and painful chemical burns. These people did the dirty work that powerful dishwashers do today. The castle's stone architecture itself suffered greatly from such proximity to the industrial kitchen. The walls were completely covered with a thick layer of black, greasy soot that was impossible to wash off. This stubborn soot seeped into the stone, creating the distinctive, recognizable scent of an old castle. If you've ever been to an old historical museum, you've surely smelled this scent. It's the smell of hundreds of years of continuously burning damp wood and pork fat sizzling over a fire. History has literally permeated these thick walls with its pungent culinary aromas. Every single detail of this system operated at the absolute limit of human and physical capabilities. The castle was a complex living organism, and the enormous kitchen was its tireless digestive system. People died, suffered horrific injuries, and suffocated, but food continued to flow uninterrupted to the Lord's table. It was a perfectly tuned mechanism, forged from fire, blood, and backbreaking labor. Understanding this logistics forces us to take a fresh, disillusioned look at the romance of the age of chivalry. And this logically leads us to the main final conclusion about life in that harsh era. Medieval kitchens were far from the cozy places we see in beautiful movies. They were harsh, dirty, and incredibly dangerous, closed industrial complexes. People worked there under conditions that today seem absolutely unthinkable and incredibly cruel. Every day they performed culinary miracles, constantly risking their own health and lives. Their hard labor remained in the shadows while knights and lords claimed all the historical glory. And this is, perhaps, the greatest social injustice of all the old historical chronicles. The next time you turn on your safe induction stove, think of these people. Think of the poor boys turning heavy spits in the suffocating heat of a blazing hearth. Think of the rugged cooks breathing in acrid smoke and risking fatal scalds. They were true engineering geniuses of survival, laying the foundation for modern global cuisine. Our history is written not only on the battlefields of great wars, but also at the burning stoves. Thank you for joining me in this scorching dungeon, and until we meet again.